4:40 a.m., Tacloban City, Philippines. Darkness still covered everything, but the ground began to shake violently. Coastal residents jolted awake to a strange, muffled, suffocating roar echoing from the horizon. It sounded like thousands of fighter jets taking off at the same time. And then it hit. A pitch-black wall of water, thick with mud and corpses, rose 49 feet straight up like a 5-story building, tearing open the night and slamming inland. It didn't run, it bombarded. In a single second, even the strongest houses were crushed like eggshells. Reinforced concrete twisted. Vehicles were crumpled into balls, and tens of thousands of terrified screams were swallowed instantly by the merciless surge. No retreat, no ground left to run to. The ocean had taken the land. Welcome to the darkest scenario in meteorological history, an extreme super typhoon, with its central pressure plunging freely to below 860 HP, turning the storm's core into a black hole that drains away life itself. This time, nature wasn't just angry. It was carrying out a death sentence. And humankind was nothing but tiny creatures waiting for the final verdict. 24 hours before the Philippine Sea, known as the Ring of Fire of tropical cyclones, was experiencing an abnormal physical phenomenon never recorded in modern meteorological chronicles. Sea surface temperatures had crossed 87.8 degrees Fahrenheit, spreading across an area of thousands of square miles. This wasn't seawater anymore, this was fuel. Kerosene waiting for a spark on radar screens at the Joint Typhoon Warning Center. Meteorologists stared at dancing data with faces drained of blood. The atmospheric pressure at the storm center was in free fall. 900, 800, 880, and then it bottomed out at an unimaginable number. 860 HP. A number that broke every safety rule of nature. By the laws of physics, the lower the pressure, the stronger the pull. It was operating like a gigantic cosmic vacuum cleaner, sucking in all the air, moisture, and thermal energy, while that pitch-black, bottomless eye in the middle. Back on land in Samar and Leyte provinces, nature began issuing warnings in the language of death. Infrasound. Ultra-low frequency waves born from friction between the storm and the sea raced 1,000 kilometers ahead of the winds, hammering into the razor-sharp hearing of the animal world. In the mangrove forests, thousands of seabirds suddenly dove straight into the ground or slammed into cliffs. They could no longer tell north from sky. Along the Tacloban coast, people watched in horror like something out of a nightmare film. Hundreds of dolphins washed ashore, gasping on the scorching sand. Their eyes rolled back, air bladders ruptured by sudden pressure shifts in the deep. They'd rather die drying out on land than face the monster churning beneath the ocean. 12 hours before landfall, the sky began to transform. If you looked up right now, you'd see a bruised purple mixed with a pale, sickly blue. The color of a necrotic wound spreading wider. It was light scattering as billions of tons of water vapor compressed to an unprecedented density. The dragon scale clouds hung so low, people felt like they could raise a hand and touch the belly of the beast. Bulging and throbbing like enormous malignant tumors overhead, choking the sky, draining oxygen, the air turned thick and heavy. Humidity hit saturation. The smell of ozone, the scorched stench of burning electricity, and the salty reek of ships smashed apart far offshore began seeping into every alley. And then people began to feel Haiyan's presence inside their own bodies. Storm sickness struck in waves as the air pressure dropped too fast. The human body couldn't adapt in time. At field hospitals, long lines formed, everyone showing the exact same symptoms. Headaches pounding like a hammer, chests crushed as if a 1-ton boulder were pressing down, ears ringing, unable to hear the person standing right in front of them. Tiny blood vessels in the noses and eyes of sensitive people began to burst. Children screamed non-stop as pressure crushed their eardrums. A wave of unexplained nausea and restless panic spread like a virus. The national warning system issued its final messages with an unprecedented level of urgency. Mandatory evacuation, full-scale catastrophic emergency. But every effort became meaningless against Haiyan's insane forward speed. The only roads leading out of the city were completely paralyzed. Thousands of cars sat bumper to bumper, frozen in place, turning into iron coffins left exposed under the open sky. Blaring horns, screaming curses, and people fighting for space created a chaotic symphony of desperation. 6 hours before hour, the wind began to rise. But this was not a cool breeze. These were blasts of scorching air thrown out from an offshore furnace. Coconut trees began to bend and groan. In satellite images, Haiyan revealed its full form. It was beautiful in a brutal way, a perfect spiral blanketing the entire South China Sea and the Western Pacific. The storm's eye was razor-sharp, perfectly round, and bottomless like the wide-open gaze of a demon staring down at the world. Its cloud bands were so dense they blotted out sunlight completely, turning day into night. And then the fateful moment arrived. The outer edge of the storm touched land. It began with a massive explosion, the sound of the first high-voltage transformer overloading and detonating, spraying vivid green electrical arcs that ripped through the dark sky. Right after that came the whistle. At first it sounded like a kite flute, then it became a train horn, and finally the mad roar of a wounded beast. Those first raindrops didn't fall straight down. They flew sideways, parallel to the ground, like sniper rounds. With winds already reaching 93 miles per hour in the outer bands, the rain became a lethal weapon. It slapped across faces, burning like knife cuts, hammering windows and spiderwebbing the glass with cracks. Trees didn't snap. They were ripped out by the roots. Century-old trees were yanked from the earth as easily as pulling weeds, lifted helplessly into the air, then hurled into nearby homes. Steel billboards twisted and hovered like dry leaves, slicing through tangled power lines, creating deadly showers of electrical sparks raining down on the panicked crowd. The ground shook with each wave of wind. Not from an earthquake, but from the wind punching straight into building foundations. Single-story buildings began cracking from the inside, brick walls splitting open, exposing bare rooms to the sky's assault. From the sea, the water level began rising in an unnatural way. There were no romantic waves rolling in. The sea rose in grim silence, frothing white, swallowing the beach, swallowing the coastal road, and began licking at the foundations of flashy hotels. The ocean was taking one deep breath, compressing all its power to prepare the finishing punch known as a meteorological tsunami. People curled up in dark corners of their homes, clutching each other tight, covering their ears to escape the insane roar outside. But they knew this was only the overture. If the outer bands were this horrifying, then what was waiting for them in the eye wall? 5:30 a.m. The world outside the window no longer existed. The very concept of a city, streets, or neighborhoods had been wiped clean from the dictionary. All that remained was a raging, milky white blur, and the roar of an invisible monster devouring everything. At that moment, the last surviving wind instruments at the Tacloban weather station recorded one final number before being torn apart, 199 miles per hour. But that was only the sustained wind. The gusts. Death slaps had already crossed 249 miles per hour. At that speed, air was no longer a gas. It became a liquid, thick and heavy like mercury. The laws of physics were bent. Raindrops were accelerated to bullet speed. They didn't fall, they flew sideways, punching through soft flesh, shattering 0.79-inch thick tempered glass like it was paper. Imagine billions of water bullets firing non-stop into your house for 4 straight hours. Concrete began to pit, wall paint was stripped clean, exposing the rebar inside. Splintered wood, corrugated metal sheets, and broken branches were torn away by the wind, turning into flying saw blades. A simple wooden beam, driven by 249 miles per hour winds, shot forward with terrifying kinetic energy, impaling straight through an 8-inch brick wall, through a refrigerator, through every obstacle in its path. Inside homes that still hadn't collapsed, atmospheric pressure dropped suddenly, creating a horrifying pressure difference between inside and outside. By Bernoulli's principle, roofs aren't blown off by the wind. They're lifted by vacuum suction from above, popped upward, like opening the lid of a box. The instant the roof vanished, the entire surrounding wall structure lost its support. It collapsed inward or was blasted outward. Families huddled under tables in bathrooms suddenly found themselves exposed under open sky. Nothing left to shield them from the heavens' fury, but the wind was only the path clearer. The real destroyer was only now arriving. From the sea, The gigantic wall of water slammed in the storm surge. It wasn't like an earthquake tsunami with a single wave. This was a near-permanent rise in sea level, amplified by low pressure sucking the surface upward and the wind driving water onto shore. A 49-foot mass of water higher than street lights, higher than every coconut tree, advancing inland at the speed of a high-speed train, black as mud, oil slicks, sewage, and trash. When that water hit the seawall, it didn't stop. It swallowed the port, swallowed the airport. Shipping containers weighing 11 tons at the docks were lifted and floated like matchboxes, then slammed into high-rise buildings, triggering impacts that exploded like blockbuster bombs. Water surged into the first floor, then the second, then the third of beachfront hotels in under 10 minutes. Residents who climbed onto single-story rooftops to escape the flood suddenly realized their deadly mistake. The water rose higher than their roofs. They were dragged into the whirlpooling flow and smashed into floating debris. No one could swim in a current like that. It was a gigantic blender mixing reinforced concrete, car wrecks, and human bodies. At the evacuation center in the domed stadium, the tragedy unfolded in the worst possible script. The solid steel dome, the city's pride, began to groan with an ear-splitting metallic screech. Wind forced its way into gaps, building extreme pressure. One massive section of roofing was ripped away and hurled into the sky. Instantly, wind and rain poured in like a waterfall. Thousands inside panicked, trampling one another as they searched for an exit. But floodwater had sealed every doorway. The stadium became a gigantic pool, a trap with no way out. Screams, prayers, and the names of loved ones merged with the storm's roar into a tragic chorus of hell on earth. Then suddenly, silence. Everything stopped. The wind stopped blowing, the rain stopped falling. The air turned so still, it was suffocating. Survivors lifted their heads from the rubble, stunned, as they looked up high. Birds began circling inside that strange, perfectly round pocket of space. This was the eye of the storm. The heart of the monster was passing directly over the city. A gigantic hollow cylinder, about 18.6 miles wide, where pressure was at its lowest, and sinking air created a false, eerie clarity. All around them was the eye wall, a vertical wall of cloud, rising 9.3 miles high, blinding white and violently spinning the place that held the greatest destructive power. In panic and ignorance, people thought the storm had ended. They poured into the streets, sobbing, searching for loved ones, trying to dig through the rubble. They didn't realize they were standing inside the mouth of death. And death was only blinking before delivering the finishing blow. 15 minutes passed. The patch of blue sky vanished as fast as it had appeared. The cloud wall behind it crashed in. This time, the wind reversed completely from before. Structures already loosened by the first round now took a second punch from the opposite direction. The collapse was instant and total. Walls that were still standing fell. Trees that were still holding on were twisted and snapped off. Even worse, when the eye passed, the wind direction shifted violently. It pushed the entire massive body of water flooding inland back toward the sea, creating a brutal, retreating current. The water drained away at a terrifying speed, dragging everything it had swallowed with it. Homes, vehicles, and thousands of people clinging to life. They were yanked out into the open ocean, vanishing into white-capped waves as tall as mountains. The national communication system went dead. Not a single distress signal got through. Telecom towers snapped in half or were swept away. Power stations shorted out, caught fire, and exploded in chain reactions. In that moment, the Philippines became a black hole on the world map, isolated, devastated, and abandoned. From hardened underground bunkers in Manila, the government stared at satellite screens showing blank, dead signals from the central region, unable to speak. They understood that what was happening in Tacloban was no longer a natural disaster. It was an erasure. No rescue team, no helicopter, no warship could reach the storm's core now. Humanity, with all its technology and pride, could only watch its own kind being crushed completely powerless. Down on the ground, in pitch-black pools of water, desperate hands rose up and then disappeared. Cries faded out, replaced by the single ruling sound of water and wind. And the monster kept growling, continuing to plow the earth to pieces moving slowly like it wanted to savor every second of pain on this beautiful island. The peak of the catastrophe wasn't death. The peak was the realization that no miracle is coming today. 48 hours passed after the demon's eye moved on. The storm pushed deep into the South China Sea, carrying its fury toward the Asian mainland. It left behind a Philippine archipelago no longer whole in form. If 24 hours earlier, the destruction came from the roar of the wind, now, the destruction came from something 10,000 times more terrifying. Silence and darkness. The Philippines' entire national power grid went down permanently. Not a localized outage, but a system-wide paralysis, substations failing, high-voltage lines, coastal power plants, everything reduced to twisted scraps soaked in salt water. Manila, the capital, the heart of the nation, was now a hellish version of Venice. Black water up to the chest, trash drifting everywhere, and bloated animal carcasses trapped between luxury cars sinking under the surface. The Philippines had vanished from the world's map of light. More than 100 million people were thrown back into the Stone Age in a single instant. No internet, no cell service, no clean water, no light. Modern civilization turned out to be as fragile as a sheet of water-soaked paper. Under the suffocating tropical heat of 95 degrees Fahrenheit, millions of tons of garbage, animal carcasses, sewage, and even human bodies that still hadn't been found began decomposing at a terrifying speed. The stench of death smothered the air so thick you could taste it in your throat. Stored freshwater supplies were contaminated by salt and bacteria. Cholera and dysentery broke out immediately. The hospitals that were still standing were quickly overwhelmed. There was no electricity to run ventilators, no clean water to wash wounds, antibiotics ran out, and doctors could only watch helplessly as patients slowly died of sepsis from the smallest scratches. Cholera spread like an unstoppable wildfire, moving through contaminated water, turning refugee camps into gigantic open-air morgues at supermarkets. The remaining shopping centers on the outskirts, looting erupted. At first, it was a fight for food and drinking water. Then for TVs and electronics. Things useless in a disaster, but human greed still rose by inertia. The police and the military were victims too. Their families were missing as well. Stretched thin, they were completely powerless against a frenzied crowd of tens of thousands, and the world realized in shock that this super typhoon was not a random event. It was the opening act of the horror film that climate change is producing for humanity's future. The sun finally rose. But today's dawn carried no golden hope. Silence swallowed everything. No more car horns, no more music, no more bird song, only the absolute stillness of death. Beneath that thick brown mud, hundreds of thousands of lives had fallen asleep forever, buried along with their dreams. Their smiles, the script ends here. But its haunting aftermath does not. With the oceans heating up day by day, level 6 monsters, even level 7, are quietly being incubated in the deep. We still pride ourselves on being the masters of Earth, but in the face of this planet's true wrath, humanity is as fragile as a candle in a storm wind. The question for you isn't whether this will happen, but when it will happen.